How much can posture dictate the direction of your therapy session? Well, in today's video, we're going to find out. Once again, we're going to be joining clinical psychologist Judith Johnson in her first cognitive behavioural therapy session with a young woman who's come to see her following a referral from her GP. And this young woman has been feeling very low. She's been feeling down in energy. She's been struggling with motivation. And so she's taken the courageous step to reach out and to get some help. Once again, in this video, we won't be critiquing the therapeutic approach or the therapeutic principles that are being used. What we are looking at is what does her nonverbal behavior show us, and what would happen if we were to integrate some nonverbal behavior analysis in this session. What we'll see is that there are many moments where integrating some nonverbal behavior analysis can help the client go on a deeper journey of exploration and to help her get to the root cause even faster. Let's dive in. Okay, so we've got some context here. Gabriella has been experiencing low mood for some time and she's gone to seek out some psychological therapy. And here we are in her first session. Let's take a look. If we take a moment to pause right at the beginning here, we can take a brief look at the starting postures of our two communicators here. If we start with Judith Johnson, the clinical psychologist here on the right, we can see that we've got a relatively open posture in terms of her upper body. Do have the arms close together, the hands touching, but we've got a relatively open body posture. We've got a closing of the lower legs, so crossed legs here, presumably for comfort, and we've seen this in other videos before. So quite a welcoming posture there. If we then take a look at Gabriella, we can see that we've got quite a contrast here. So Gabriella is somewhat slumped forwards. We have a rounding of the shoulders. Looks like we've got a slight forward head position. So we've got a leaning forwards of the trunk, and then we've got those hands sort of tightly clasped together, interlocking fingers here. So although we don't know much about Gabriella at all yet, we can see from a starting posture that we've got quite a different position from Judith Johnson. If we think about what posture is, it is the configuration of the different body parts. And so we can think about posture as forming not only the configuration, so the postural configuration, but we can also look at body orientation and then the degrees of movement within that. So we can see that Judith Johnson here is clearly orientated towards Gabriella, and Gabriella to a lesser degree, but still orientated towards Judith Johnson here. Now, posture is far more enduring than many of the nonverbal cues in the sense that it tends to be more consistent throughout an interaction or throughout a communication. And this is helpful for us because it makes it somewhat easier to notice significant or salient changes in posture. But it also helps us to see how someone is approaching a particular context. So we don't know any other information yet, but we've got what looks like an interesting setup.
I understand that you're here today because you've been experiencing some low mood.
Yeah, I just
And again, if we pause it here, so we've gone into the problem context here, and Gabriella's first response is to slightly orientate away from Judith Johnson here. Then we've got a downward tilting of the head and an aversion of the gaze. Now, there's lots of different reasons why someone might avert their gaze. First of all, it may be that they're under or experiencing a higher cognitive load. So if we're really thinking about something, so if we're putting a lot of mental effort in, sometimes we can avert our gaze to just reduce our visual stimulus, to decouple what's going on in the environment around us and to allow us to focus on what we're concentrating on. We'll see an aversion in gaze as a common characteristic as in those suffering from social anxiety disorder, where we can see that contact in terms of eye contact can be perceived as threatening to those individuals. And so one way that we can cope with that is by averting our gaze and changing our head position. There's many other reasons. So in particular, relating to past experiences, so touching on emotional memory image theory here, if someone has a particularly potent emotional memory, so that's risen to the surface and it's in their mind's eye, even if they're not conscious of it, one of the ways that we can again try to mitigate and cope with that is by averting our gaze away from the stimulus. So we've got lots of different reasons here that may suggest something is going on in terms of her internal processing. Now, it's also worth noting here in terms of social norms. So often people will avert their gaze with people that they don't particularly know very well to avoid or inhibit sending out any inappropriate signs or signals. So many different reasons here, but it's interesting to note.
Recently, I'm just feeling down a lot, and I can't really like snap out of it. Like sometimes, if it's happened before, I can just like get myself back on track. But recently, I'm just finding it really difficult to do.
And so we can see in this clip that there's a little bit of a licking of the lips. Again, many reasons why someone may lick their lips. Could be a particular pattern of hers, could be an early indicator that there's some degree of physiological stress, and so her mouth is a little bit dry, which wouldn't in any way be surprising. It's her first session with a therapist that she doesn't know. She's probably feeling a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit anxious, and therefore having a little bit of a dry mouth is probably something that 99% of people would experience. So we can just notice to see if it becomes a pattern or if it only occurs during certain contexts. And while we're pausing in this moment, we can also talk through how we might categorize someone in terms of their postural configuration. So the simplest way to describe it is thinking about a spectrum, and on one end of the spectrum, someone may be adopting an expanded posture. So we can think about this postural configuration as taking up more room. So we'll see a widening of the shoulders, a puffing out of the chest. We might see a tilting up of the chin and head position, but they're taking up more space, so they're expanding their physical space. The opposite end of the spectrum there is a contracted posture. So this is where we're essentially shrinking inwards. So we're contracting our muscles inwards and we're taking up less space. This fits quite neatly with another way of categorizing posture in terms of dominance or submissive. So as we would expect, a dominant posture tends to adopt more of an expanded approach, so taking up more room, more associated with power, whereas a submissive approach in terms of posture is taking up less space, and we'll often see that coupled with a gaze aversion and a downward tilting of the head. Similarly, along these lines, we can think about posture as being relatively open or relatively closed. So an open posture, we can think about the arms and legs as being having space in between them, so the body language is open, whereas a more closed posture may be present for a number of reasons, but it's typically associated with maybe a more defensive or protective posture in certain cases. And then finally, when it comes to postures, we can think about, well, is it something that's habitual for this individual? So is it normal for them? Or is it, for some reason, is it psychologically meaningful? So we'll notice this based on the account that they're giving, the context that they're in, and then any salient changes within this. So initially here we can see that Gabriella is in that sort of slumped posture here. So we've got more of a contracted posture. When we have the clasping of the hands together, that's typically associated with more of a closed posture. But again, she's in the early moments of a therapy session, so it's just something worth noting. In terms of recent research, so there's quite substantial research that's linking posture to different emotional states, in particular depression. There is a recent systematic review. Deshma, I believe, is the author with her colleagues. And in that systematic review, they found that there's a bi-directional relationship between posture and depression. So the more slumped we are, the more likely we are to encounter depressive episodes, and the more depressed episodes we have, the more likely we are to experience a slumped posture. So we can see that there's a clear link between these two pieces. In that recent systematic review, they also found that slumped posture is associated with a higher severity of depression, particularly in females, and they found this was even more prominent in sort of high school age females. So not totally applicable here, but again, we've got not too far away in terms of age. They propose that this is primarily linked to sort of body image and self-perception. So these are factors that, again, we can just be mindful of.
Okay, so it sounds like you've been experiencing some low mood and you're kind of struggling to get going a bit.
Yeah, definitely.
You've had...
Once again, we can observe that downward tilting of the head. We can see sort of a little bit of whiteness in the knuckles here, so we've got an increase in bodily tension. Now, an increase in bodily tension, when accompanied with other signs and signals, can form part of a cluster that shows us or indicates with a higher probability that that individual may be experiencing some internal stress. And it might be helpful at this stage if we were to integrate our first piece of nonverbal behavior analysis, if we were to pause here and just check in with Gabriella and ask her, what is she experiencing? What is she noticing? What's going on in her body here, to allow her to reflect and feed back what's going on in her system and see what links she makes.
Low mood in the past, but it's kind of, you've been able to pull yourself out of it before, but more recently you found that harder. Okay, so I understand that you first went to your GP, who referred you here about 2 months ago. Can I ask what led you to go to the GP in the first place?
My long-term...
So we've got a slight spike in activity there, and we've got an increase of eye closure there as we go into this context. Again, there's many reasons why that might occur because of the specific stimulus here. So why is she feeling low? That nonverbal cue might be more important, or at least to pay more attention to it. And we can also see that she's going more into that slumped posture. Now, from a research position, we can look at the effects that our posture has on our subjective feeling. So this actually goes back to the work of Amy Cuddy in terms of those power poses, that really famous TED Talk, where Cuddy and colleagues found that by adopting those expansive postures, it not only changes our subjective feelings, but it also changes our hormone levels and our perception of risk. There was then some counter research that suggested that the hormonal changes were not observed in follow-up studies, although the subjective feeling of change was there. So there's some discrepancies in terms of actually what chemical or what chemistry changes may occur, but it's fairly agreeable that these expansive posture at least improve our subjective feelings. Now, more recently, a meta-analysis by Elkyars et al. Found that actually, although expansive postures may play a role, the effects are relatively small, whereas the impact of contracted postures is actually much more significant. So given that Gabriella has been feeling low for some time, we can see in these early changes that there's a degree of emotional discomfort here, and we've got a relatively consistent pattern of a slumped posture here that may be having more of an impact on her. And even at this relatively early stage, it might be interesting to feed this information back to her and to help her learn about the directional impact between posture and how she's feeling, so we can bring a bit of psychoeducation in fairly early here.
My boyfriend broke up with me, and it was such a shock. Like, I really wasn't expecting it, and it just got me really down. I just felt really lonely, and I didn't really want to see people, and just wanted to be in my own space. And my mum told me I should probably go to the doctors, and I went.
And so if we're talking about something that was emotionally overwhelming, so something that had a significant impact, this may lend itself to emotional memory image theory here. So if during that moment of overwhelm, it was such a shock, her nervous system stored an emotional memory image relating to the breakup. And actually, if that is still playing in her mind's eye, then again, we'll see this aversion behavior in order to cope or compensate for it. We also see a slight change or exaggeration of this slump posture when the context of mum comes up. So we'll pay attention to that and see if that gets explored any further.
and he's referred me to you.
Okay, so it sounds like you had that breakup and you weren't expecting it, so it kind of came out of the blue a bit, and that you've been on your own quite a lot, so you've not been seeing people as much, and it sounds like your mum noticed that there's been...
And so we can see here with Gabriella that we're getting a little bit more fidgeting, so we can see a little bit more movement. We saw the adapter there, so bringing her head stroking across her hairline. So there's much research to suggest adapters occur in lots of different circumstances, ranging from relaxation all the way up to where we tend to increase our frequency of self-touch when we're having some kind of difficult or unpleasant experience. It would be helpful here to see that whole body position to see if we're having signs of increased tension throughout the body.
A bit of a change in you. Okay, and how have things been then, since that happened and since you went to the GP?
Nothing's really changed, nothing's really improved. I just feel down, like everything's an effort, and just feel...
And if we pause from examining her non-verbal behaviour for a moment and take a listen to her verbal behaviour, we can see that there's generalizations here. So always, nothing, everything. So from a linguistics position, she's generalizing quite a bit. Now, there was some really interesting research where they essentially had two different groups, where there was a depressed group and a non-depressed group. And when they were analyzing the language patterns between these two groups, they were much more likely to be able to predict which group someone would be in based on their language choices. And so they were able to identify people in the depressed group through many mechanisms, but one of which being this use of overgeneralizations. So this might be another helpful point to bring up here or to put it in your pocket for later, but it's worth highlighting here that we've got some generalizing language which might be having an impact on her.
Distant from things, and like I said, I can't snap out of it.
Okay. And how did you feel about coming here today?
We might not need much verbal content to get a sense of how she feels about coming here today. So we can see this really exaggerated slump posture here. Again, we're noticing that she's playing with the collar on her top. We've got sort of more fidgeting around the fingers. We've got a licking of the lips. We've got a downward tilt of the gaze and the head. So we lick our lips for many different reasons. One of them, just if we're preparing to speak. If we're in an uncomfortable context for a period of time, our mouth tends to get a little bit dry as well. But we can see that from a non-verbal position, she's not over the moon at being here.
I was kind of disappointed in myself because I feel like nobody else my age is doing this. Like, I should have been able to snap out of it. Like, it's just another thing that I've not really... It's another thing that's making me stand out for the wrong reasons.
And although we're not here to critique the therapeutic approach here, we can see that we've got some quite negative language here, and we've got some quite harsh self-talk here. Now, we talked earlier how posture and depression may be related, or at least posture may influence feelings of depression, but we also know that when we're in a state of feeling a little bit low and a little bit down, we tend to revert towards a negative memory bias. So we tend to recall more moments where we're feeling low and we're feeling down, and then we tend to judge future events and past events through a more negative lens because of the emotional state that we're in.
I'm just hoping that it's going to help. I think I didn't really want to admit it because, like, it's just another failure. But my mum was talking to me, and I know she's not really happy with the way I'm behaving, and I don't really want to disappoint her again. And so I thought...
And we see this rather large fragment here. So the fragment of the bigger gesture of, I'm lacking confidence here, or I'm uncertain here. And this is totally aligned with the account that she's sharing and the context that she's in. So it's perfectly congruent nonverbal behavior here, but we can just see that sign element of the gesture here. We're in the context of mum again, talking about disappointment. So this might be a valuable point to pause allow Gabriella to check in and notice what's happening in her body, ask her to share that and articulate that, and notice how that changes as we continue.
There's no harm in it, so I just thought it'd come.
Okay. So it sounds like partly you're doing it then for your mum because you're a bit worried that she isn't pleased with you at the moment.
And we can see that even more exaggerated downward tilt of the head position here. Once again, referring to emotional memory image theory. If Gabriella does have mental images relating to her mum, either from younger years or more recent years, if we have that mental image up high and above our system, then again that can cause us to shrink, to contract in, and to almost physiologically regress more like to a child.
Saw from your notes that you're a medic student.
Yeah, I'm not currently in uni at the moment, but yeah, last year I was a medic student.
Okay, so and it sounds then maybe like your first year was also quite tough.
Yeah.
You can see that we're starting to get a little bit more movement in the trunk, getting a bit of fidgeting here. We've got lots of manipulative behaviour in terms of fingers touching and rubbing against each other. We're in an uncomfortable context, as she just started to share there. We're seeing relatively consistent behavioural patterns from her, so we won't comment on these all the way through, but we're seeing some really interesting non-verbal behaviour. But we're not at this point bringing the client's attention to any of it and allowing her to explore it for herself. So this is where non-verbal behaviour analysis can be really valuable.
Was that I thought it's tough for everyone, but obviously we all take it in different ways, don't we?
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't sound like you.
And we can see that there's another lip lick there, so we've got 2 or 3 of those in the last 20 seconds. We also get a little bit of a lip compression here. Now, if we look at more pop psychology in terms of body language cues, the lip compression is a really, really popular one, and it's often stated as being withholding something or not stating information that we might wish to express. From a research position, we can see that the lip compression is typically associated with the prototypical display of anger, which of course would not fit in this context here. But the lip compression may also present during uncertainty, during sadness. It can occur during lots of different emotional states, so we can't assign any meaning to it here.
Want to go back?
I do. I do enjoy it. I just don't feel like me at the moment, and it's a lot.
If we take a congruence check here, so we've got that slump posture, the downward head position, the tilted gaze, and yet verbally she's saying, I do enjoy it. We can see that there's quite an interesting contrast here. So again, worthwhile checking in at this point and asking her to reflect on her nonverbal feedback and seeing what she thinks in terms of how that aligns with what she's saying. So we're encouraging the client to explore into their nonverbal behavior.
Of work and it's a lot of pressure, but that's what comes with it, and you know, it'll work out for the best if I go.
Okay. How many shifts have you done there?
I've only done 1 so far. Yeah, I don't know whether it's something that I'd probably go back to, but I just think.
As we go into this context here, so I've only done 1, and then we get that increase in exaggerated head tilt. So a potential or a possible hypothesis here is that she's feeling some kind of guilt or shame around having only done 1 particular shift. It might be that she really disliked that shift. It might be that it doesn't align with who she wants to be in terms of her identity. So many different reasons here, but it's interesting to know. And again, it could be used to feedback.
Slow, and people sometimes they didn't understand what I was saying, so I'd have to talk louder or quieter or slower, and I got a bit confused sometimes with the orders, and I just don't really think that I'm not really like a friendly, like people don't really think that I'm a friendly person, so they didn't really want to talk to me and stuff. I felt like
We're getting, again, lots of self-depreciating talk here, which is coinciding with an increase in her contracted posture. So from a non-verbal perspective, this is congruent with her verbal output. But we can see from an emotional perspective, she's got a relatively flat affect, so we're not seeing much expressiveness in the face. A flat affect is also associated with feelings of low or feelings of being low or feelings of depression, because we're not being as animated or expressive as we usually might be. And so if she's not feeling like herself, she's contracting inwards, it would be really helpful for her to understand the impact that her posture can have on how she feels. And it might even be an interesting moment to explore this in terms of helping her to change her posture. So in the room, encouraging her to change her posture, and then asking her what she notices, and then going through a couple of different questions to actually see what happens when she goes out of this posture. So there's some interesting research by Wilkes et al., and they actually showed that when we have a more upright, sort of erect posture, that actually makes more positive language easier to find, whereas when we're slumped, it's actually more difficult to recall positive information.
Like inconveniencing them by like asking them things and getting things wrong. But yeah.
When you're having these kind of thoughts, because that's quite a lot of negative thoughts you're describing, how do you feel?
So we've reached a point in the conversation here where we are moving towards feelings. Now, interestingly, we've gone for a more generalized, when you have these thoughts, how do you feel? I would be more interested in this moment, having shared those thoughts, what are you noticing now? What are you experiencing now? So really bringing her into the present moment to help her to connect to what happens in her body when she shares these thoughts. And then from here, we might extrapolate out to a more generalized idea.
Just feel empty. I don't. I'm just calling as it is. I'm just calling it as reality.
So we've got a slight increase in response latency, so a little bit more time in between the different answers. Again, we've got a relatively flat affect. We're not getting much expression in the face. And then we're going or continuing the journey down into a progressively more negative state at this stage.
I feel like I'm being honest with myself by just voicing it and not trying to go around hiding it, because I know, like, I can see it in myself.
So it might be interesting here to explore when she says, I can see it in myself. So actually exploring, what does she see? What mental images does she have running? How does she see herself in her mind's eye? And helping to explore actually what her own self-perception is. Once again, we can see that we're playing with the collars or the cuffs on her top here, and we're in a fairly consistent and static posture still.
Feel distant, and like I said, I'm not really myself. It's like I'm not really there, but when I am, I can't even do a good job. And
Are there any other emotions that you experience?
I feel drained. I don't feel like I'm in touch with anything. Just, it's like everything's going on around me, but I'm just not there. It's like I'm just watching.
And while this information is certainly helpful to get an understanding of where she is and what's going on for her, as we're going deeper into her narrative about what she's like and what she struggles with, we're going to create a stronger negative chemical state here, which is going to result in probably her feeling heavy, her feeling down, and actually exacerbating the feelings that she's actually come here to start to work on. When we can integrate nonverbal behavior analysis into these sessions, and we can almost truncate these narratives into short pieces of information, and then allow the client to curiously review and explore what's going on in their body with a lighter disposition and a more curious mindset, then it can be more of an exploration rather than a slippery slope going down into a negative state.
When you have those emotions, how does it affect your energy levels? Do you feel more energetic, less energetic, or about the same?
Now, I don't think we need to be a nonverbal behaviour analysis to answer that question. So, of course, there are certain questions that may need to be asked to get a full piece of information, but I think her nonverbal behaviour has given us everything that we need to know here.
When I'm feeling down,
Yeah, when you're having those emotions that you were describing.
I just feel drained. Like, I just have to get up, I suppose. I don't really have a choice. Because I live with my mum, and I know it's hard for her, so I don't want her to be too worried, so I just...
So this follows on from what we saw earlier. So we've gone into the context of her and her mum. We did see once again that little lip compression. We've gone into a exaggerated downward tilt and averted gaze again. So the context of her and her mum is obviously something that evokes emotions within her. Although we can't see any clear animations on her face, we can get a sense of what she might be experiencing. So this would be something that could be come back to at a certain point, because it seems like it might be quite an important context. Well, there you have it. What a wonderful example of how powerful posture and non-verbal behaviour can be. If you haven't heard of me before, my name is Danny Greaves, and I specialise in applying the principles of non-verbal behaviour analysis into mental health settings. I'd love to hear your thoughts below, so please share with me, what did you think was the key part or the key moment of non-verbal behaviour, and how would have you used it in a session? I'll see you soon. Bye.